I wonder what the threshold, I've used that word a lot today, the threshold is for being susceptible to anti-refugee rhetoric in the context of your own problems. I wonder if there is a logical relationship between it. I've always been of the view that it's politically toxic and genius at the same time to blame the other for your own life. If I can persuade you that it is the fault of Mexicans that you can't afford to retire, or if I can persuade you that it is the fault of refugees that you can't afford to retire, if I can persuade you that it is the fault of people who came here in the 50s as part of the Windrush generation, that they're the reason why you can't afford to move house or can't afford to get your kids to school. I mean, that is just, if you're in power, that's just genius, right? I mean, it's such a massive get out of jail free card. And what does right-wing media do, if not support right-wing government? I don't think we've ever seen it quite as plainly and quite as cynically as we have in the last few years. But the way in which client media has given a free pass to everything from the calamity of Liz Truss to the moral depravity of Boris Johnson and the rank awfulness of Rishi Sunak, it's actually breathtaking. Rishi Sunak's been in charge for long enough now to have made a difference to something somewhere. And yet that last hour was jam-packed by the end with people whose lives have been put into reverse, or at the very least have been put on pause by a cost of living crisis about which government could clearly do more. They're still clamouring for tax cuts, which obviously will help people who are more comfortable than others. The idea that public sector spending is something that can be shaved more it's absolutely breathtaking, but it's ideologically sound. So why am I linking these two stories together? Because I am genuinely interested in why you think Rishi Sunak made this promise about small boats when, as far as I could tell, and speaking to people who know of what they speak, it was obvious to everybody that it wasn't going to work. So why did he do it? I think the first way into that question will be to say because it could have worked, perhaps, and he just didn't understand the issue. Perhaps Rishi Sunak and other members of the cabinet have believed the right-wing bile punted by their own client media. So if these people coming here in small boats really were all sort of lead-swinging, passport-burning charlatans who are coming here because the idea of getting £9 a week is so attractive they're prepared to risk their lives for it, then maybe it would have worked. Maybe the idea of being banged up straight away the minute you get onto the beach would have worked. But if you're a genuine refugee, then obviously it's irrelevant. All that the place you're running towards has to be is safer than the place you're running away from. And of course, maybe they've fallen for that. Why can't they all stay in France, which is a position of such epic ignorance? The idea that every Ukrainian refugee should have stayed in Poland because it's the first country they'd enter into. I wonder whether we've seen with Suella Braverman, and to a lesser extent with Rishi Sunak, but only lesser because he's not front and centre on the issue. I wonder whether we've seen what happens when conservative politicians start believing the lies of their own client media. God, that would be fascinating, wouldn't it? Trying to get your head around the Rishi Sunak attitude to small boats. There are two answers at the moment to the question of why did he do it? Why did he do it? The first answer is because he needs to distract you from what we've been talking about all morning. But it only works in the short term if he knows it's not going to work. Why did he make this pledge? Answer, because he's really hoping to replace EU or immigration with small boats. He needs that whipping boy. He needs that receptacle of vitriol into which the great British public will pour all of their unhappiness and all of their disappointment and all of their grievance, and they will blame it on people in small boats instead of blaming it on people in charge. I mean, really, when you think about it, it's amazing that we've fallen for it for so long. Who are you going to blame? The people in charge or the people in small boats? I'm going to blame the people in small boats, James. I work for GBBs. It's actually breathtaking. Oh, the Tories are great. Bring back Boris. Oh, I love them all. They're fantastic. That Nadine Dorries, she's wonderful. Jacob Rees-Mogg, that's the kind of man that should be running the country. So who are you going to blame for the fact that your own life is not going where you wanted it to? Well, I'm going to blame people in small boats, James. Is that why he did it? Is that, I mean, I think you're allowed to answer yes to this question. Is that the only reason why he did it? Two stories here, because the other one you're probably not going to see very widely reported. My old mate Mark Townsend had this story in The Observer on Sunday. Now, listen, if you are of the gammon and pineapple persuasion, then I appreciate you listening. I also appreciate it's a form of masochism. But I want you to ask yourself why the people that you think are telling you the truth and that small boats really are to blame for the fact that your own life isn't going in quite the direction that you hoped. I want you to just wonder for a moment why they're not telling you about this story. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has refused to endorse the scheme that helps asylum seekers in the UK. All right, fair enough. I don't want them to be helped. The UN hailed a pilot project that cut the cost of helping refugees, but the Home Office remains set on a hardline illegal immigration bill. The UN has backed a Home Office-funded pilot that would dramatically reduce the spiralling costs of the crisis-hit asylum system. Yet Suella Braverman is refusing to endorse the scheme, despite it being described as more humane. So this week, the United Nations, the UNHCR, the refugee agency that helps the UK government improve its asylum system, will praise a Home Office-funded scheme in Bedfordshire, where the cost of accommodating refugees and migrants was cut by more than half when compared with placing them in detention, which is the plan that they have now. The savings came through housing people and giving legal and welfare support. Now, why would a Home Secretary refuse to endorse something that massively cuts the costs of looking after refugees? Answer, because they're pretending that they are illegal people. The rhetoric is that genuine refugees deserve to be deported. The rhetoric is that there is no such thing as a genuine refugee. In much the same way that there's no such thing as a safe and legal route into this country, so there can be no such thing as a safe and legal refugee. They must all be enemies. They must all be, well, you tell me if you've ever heard her use the word invasion. So I get that bit of it. But what did they think was going to happen? And if the Times headline today, migrants will cost billions for years, is true, why would they not be embracing a scheme that actually recognises the reality of the situation and cuts the costs? Why are the Tories' desperate attempts to persuade you that the reason why you're struggling to pay your mortgage or struggling to put food on the table or unable to retire or struggling to get the kids to university or struggling to buy a new car, why have the Tories' desperate attempts, straight out of the Nigel Farage thigh-rubbing playbook, why have these desperate attempts to blame these desperate people not translated into any measurable political success? Because it's always worked before in my lifetime, or at least in living memory. It's been a piece of cake. But it's not working now. Sean suggests the answer is he will say that it's not his fault that they couldn't stop the boats, James. It will all be the fault of judges, lawyers, the European Court of Human Rights, Labour. So they will use this as their next election campaign, promising to clamp down on all of these things. We've already seen them suggesting that we leave the ECHR, which leads us into the second question, which is will it work? Will it work? This desperate attempt to stake political capital on stopping them. And of course, by boasting about having succeeded, he shoots the fox, suggested by Sean in Wiltshire, of subsequently claiming we couldn't do it because of this and we couldn't do it because of that, and damn those pesky lawyers and those lefty human rights activists. You can't claim 2 months ago, in June, I think, you can't claim in June that it's all working and I'm brilliant, and then claim a year later, oh, it's all failed because of things. Because how come it was working back in June? Unless he then turns around and says, well, I was wrong then, or I was lying then. So why do you think he's gone in so hard on this particular policy? A lot of the rest of it is daft. Obviously, the inflation stuff, the interest rate stuff, a lot of that is gravity. And since the Bank of England went independent, it's got very little to do with government policy anyway. But on this one, on this specific thing, I don't understand why he did it, unless it really is the case that the government, the Prime Minister, the Cabinet have fallen for the kind of rhetoric that the tabloids have been punting out for years, which is a little bit weird. It means you've got the bloke in the pub shouting sort of nonsensical right-wing bile, and suddenly the government turns around and says, all right, let's try that. Let's try what John said. Let's try that thing that John said. And John in the pub's go, whoa, I'm just trying to draw attention to myself in the pub. I don't actually want this to be a government policy. But there it is.